Hey everyone, this is Ben from MotoCampNerd.com, and you're listening to the Finding Camp podcast. More than ever, people are getting on a motorcycle and going camping. On this show, we talk about all things motorcycles, camping, and moto travel. So let's get into it. Your sleep system is probably the most important part of your camping setup to really focus on and dial in first, because if you sleep bad or if you don't get a good night's sleep, you're going to ride terribly. You're going to feel bad, you're going to ride bad, and it's just not going to be a great overall experience. And I believe that's probably, when I'm talking to people, the most problems people have is sleeping while camping. They don't get a good night's rest, and they actually just abandon camping because they can't sleep well. And there are other factors that go into it with being outdoors. I know for me personally, I do have allergies and stuff like that. And so when I'm outdoors, just the whole environment, it messes with my sinuses. And so I've just got a plan for that. And usually the first night, my sinuses act up. But then after that, we're good to go. And so I kind of like, my body acclimates to being outdoors. But we're going to really focus on building your sleep system. And your sleep system consists of, well, it's your bed. So it's going to be, primarily we're going to talk about the sleeping pad, the sleeping bag, and a pillow. And other sleep systems could consist of a hammock and just a blanket or a quilt. But we're really going to focus on the sleeping pad and bag because they work together. And I was going to break this up into two parts, but I figured that it's better to do it all in one, and if it gets too long, I may have to split it up into part one and part two in the episodes. So we're going to start with sleeping pads because I tell most people to start from the ground and work your way up. Build this good foundation. And when you're looking at sleeping pads, you've probably seen them before, there's three main types. You've got that dense foam core sleeping pad that's kind of like a really thick yoga mat. They're really lightweight, but they don't really pack small. There's a self-inflating kind, which Thermarest has had their claim to fame with the self-inflating over the, earlier in the years, whenever it came out. And that is, it's a semi-inflated pad, but it's got a memory foam core, so it compresses down. And then when you open the valve, it kind of pulls and sucks the air back in. And they've gotten better over the years, but for me, it packs a little bit big, it's a little bit heavy, and they're still not as comfortable. I've used both of these starting out and kind of building my setup, and both the dense foam and the self-inflating were not comfortable at all for me. And then finally is the air-inflated type of sleeping pad, and that is just pure air. They do have some different variations of insulation and like that reflective material on the inside to give it an R value, but those typically are the most compact, easiest to pack, the smallest to pack, I should say, and lighter than the other two options. And at MotoCampNerd.com, we really only stock the air-inflated pads because of this reason. We're trying to keep the smallest and lightest packing. And sure, it's not as light as the dense foam, but it's packed smaller and can be almost as light, if not lighter in some models. Like the Nemo Tensor is probably the most ultralight and comfortable air pads you could probably get. Now, when you're looking at sleeping pads, you want to focus on the type of temperature and the climates you're going to be camping in, as well as the shapes and sizes depending on you and your body type. So if you're going to be camping pretty much across the country, across the world, they're going to be in all types of various geographic locations with temperature ranges all over the place. You're going to look at the R value on the sleeping pad. And that R value is your resistance to heat transfer. Excuse me. So the resistance to heat transfer is a numerical value they put on these pads. And generally you'll see 4-ish, maybe 3.8 to 4.4 or 4.5. And that's what they consider the 3 season. So that's going to be mid spring, early spring to mid late fall range. Of course, this really depends on where you're at in the country. But generally it's the basis for 3 season camping. I've found personally, when using a Diamond Park style sleeping bag that attaches to the pad, it's got that sheet material on the bottom, so there's no real other insulation. And so using that with a pad that had like an R value of 4.2, 4.3, I was comfortable down to around mid 40s. In the mid 40s, I actually had that, not necessarily a cold feeling, but a cool sensation on my back. And that's letting me know that I'm getting to a point where I probably need to get a higher R value pad, something, 5, 6, 7, or 8. Now, I know XPED has a value of 8 in some of their pads. It's a down-filled sleeping pad. And if I remember correctly, I don't believe it has any of the reflective material, and which is really nice. And it packs a little bit thicker than like some of the other ones. But then there's also Thermarest. Thermarest has, I don't remember the exact model, but it has a lightweight, high R value pad. It's probably about half the pack size of the XPED version, but instead of using downfill, it's actually using a lot of reflective material and synthetic fill, similar to what would be in a sleeping bag. The problem with this is the outer materials are really thin, and all that reflective material makes for a really loud pad compared to the XPED, which has a really thick outer material. I want to say it's like a 70 or higher denier nylon. It's a polyester outer material compared to like the 50 or 40 on the Thermarest. But it's much quieter because you have a thicker outer material, plus the whole inside's filled with down. So a lot of items, a lot of areas to look at when you're picking out your pad because of, again, the materials it's made out of, the noise and all that. And it's all really related to the R value and how they get to that R value. Now, if you're going to be camping, down in, up in 70 degree plus weather all the time, and you're never going to be anywhere below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, you might be able to get away with a non-insulated pad altogether, because you just need something to lay on that's comfortable, but also you don't want that insulation because you're hot and you want to almost dissipate your heat. And so it's going to have a little bit of an R value because it's air, it's a barrier, right? It's kind of like double pane windows at your house. You still have that air gap between you and the earth, and it's going to have like an R value of 1 or less. But it's actually going to help keep you cool because your heat's going to be pulling into that pad to warm it up. So determine where you're going to be sleeping at, the temperature range, and decide on an R value that you need for your type of camping and travel. So once you determine the R value, you want to look into the shape. Most shapes are either rectangular or mummy shaped. They have some special ones they're designed for specifically for women that are shaped differently, and they have more insulation in certain areas. But generally across the board, you're going to find either a rectangular style or a mummy style. And the mummy style is going to reduce a little bit of your pack size and weight because you're trimming materials. But depending on the bag you pick, like if you're picking a Diamond Park or a bag that actually attaches to the pad, then you'll have to go with a rectangular shape because the way it fits on there, you just have to have a rectangular one. I use a rectangular one. We found that most people enjoy the rectangular instead of the mummy style because they're going to sacrifice that minuscule amount of weight and pack size because they move around, they roll around, they turn and toss in their sleep, and they don't like their feet falling off the pad. And that's where your mummy shape is going to taper down more at the feet. And so, if you're an ultralight packer and you're on a dual sport bike, then you want to have that, that's fine. That's perfect. And if you like to do that, the gram and ounce counting and getting every bit out of it, I completely understand that and go for it. But for the most people, they enjoy the square shape because they can sleep kind of like they do at home. So the shape, the R value, the shape, also the style and the design of how it's made. Now, a lot of pads are either vertically chambered or horizontal air chambered or have this quilted like pattern to them. And I don't have a visual representation since this is audio and I'm not doing a video on it, but you could watch, I did a motorcycle camping seminar, virtual seminar, and it's on our YouTube. And it kind of goes through what I'm talking about in here, and you can see the different types. But one of the best-selling sleeping pads that we have is the Boundary Deluxe, formerly the Q-Core Deluxe, and it is that quilt pattern and shape, and people love it. Similar to that is the Nemo Tensor, which is more of a horizontal, but it still has that kind of quilted pattern where you've got all the different individual cells going across. And it just does a better job of distributing your weight. I've slept on the vertical chambered ones. And what one was it? It was the Big Agnes Air 4 Ultra. I think it's called the Divide now. Yes, it is the Divide. And I've noticed for me, it's not great because I sleep on my side and my elbow, my shoulder, my hip kind of fall into the creases of those vertical air chambers. And I notice it and I feel it, and it's just not that comfortable for me to sleep on. One thing I did notice though while sleeping on it is if I'm using a typical normal sleeping bag that's got down fill all the way around, all that down actually fills in those grooves, and I don't notice it as much versus when I'm using a Big Agnes Diamond Park style bag with this just a nylon material sheet on the bottom. I really do feel every single groove. So if you do plan on using a regular standard size bag, if you do plan on using a standard sleeping bag that kind of wraps and fills all the way around you, this may not be an issue. And the price point is quite different between the Divide and like the Boundary Deluxe, because the Boundary Deluxe, could be around $200, $220, but the Divide is like $150. So after you determine the quilting pattern or the air chamber design you would like, the next thing I would look into is also the size. Standard sleeping pads come in 20 by 72 inches. 20 inches wide, 72 inches tall. That's 6 feet. And that's usually the standard across the board. So if you see a regular sleeping pad, that's generally the size, is 20 by 72, which is 6 foot. Now, most people prefer to have that 25-inch width. That's a sweet spot because if you're a side sleeper and you're in that fetal position, you've got your knees kind of curled up, it doesn't feel like claustrophobic, like you're going to fall off, and you don't have your knees falling off to one side. And sometimes, too, when you're sleeping, you kind of get that sensation that you're going to fall off the side of the bed, or you're having to like scoot one way or the other because you have that feeling of wanting to, you're too close to the edge. So with a 25-inch pad, that kind of helps take that feeling away, which is really convenient. And the same thing, if you're taller and you want a taller pad, if you're above 6 foot, look for a wide long. So a wide long would be 25 inches wide, 78 inches tall. Now there are some other brands that go up to like 80 inches. I think even Nemo, their long is actually 76 inches, and X beds is like something weird in the middle, like 76 and a quarter or like 77 and a quarter. So not exactly 78, but close enough that we can just say generally across the board, when you're looking at a long wide, it's going to be a 25 by 78. Now, the Boundary Deluxe, and I believe its competitor would be like the Climate Static V, also come in a 30-inch wide. And this is for those who really like to roll around in their sleep and want the most, sleeping area possible. Or if you're just a larger human being and you want to have more space to flop out and sleep in, those options do exist. And after that, you're getting into double wide pads, which start around 40 inches wide and then go up to 50 or 60 inches wide. And again, 72 to 78 inches tall. Now, if you are a couple and you like to share a bag, what we do is we actually use 2 sleeping pads individually. So it's kind of like your own sleep number system. We found using one big sleeping pad, when one person would turn, it would bounce the other. You could hear all the crinkle from one side to the other. And when we started using 2 pads, we both got really good sleep. And it was kind of like just that moment, that epiphany, like, oh my gosh, why haven't we done this before? So having 2 pads makes a world of difference. And I really encourage those who are 2-up camping, or if you're camping with your significant other or whoever else, that if you're sharing a bag or you're attaching 2 bags together, get individual separate pads and do it that way. That way you can also find, because if you both have different preferences in pads, you can also get pads that you both individually like. Also, these pads, 2 pads, pack about the same size as one big one. And this also gives you the ability, if you need to shift your weight and your load and switch it up between areas on your bike, you can do that. So just a quick recap on the sleeping pads. Determine where you're going to be going and the temperature ranges so you can figure out your R value. Once you figure out your R value, go ahead and check for which pattern or air chamber style that you prefer, and also check the size and the shape, if it's going to be a rectangle or if it's going to be a mummy style. And 25 inches wide, 30 inches wide, 72 inches tall, or 78 inches tall, and kind of size it up. And then pretty much if you follow that one step at a time, it'll pretty much process of elimination will give you the options that are out there for sleeping pads. And then after that, really, it would be, I would put, the weight and the pack size at the bottom of the list. And then if your priority is more weight and pack size, then you can kind of shift those up, because then you can kind of sacrifice a little bit of your comfort. So instead of having a 25-inch pad, you may go with the 20-inch pad. It's going to cut down on the material. It's going to be a little bit lighter. It's going to pack a little bit smaller. And it's going to, get to your goal of possibly lighter more than comfort. And you can't have all of it, right? You can't have a perfect, comfortable pad and a perfect ultimate small lightweight pad. The more luxurious your pad is going to be, the more thicker the materials and the larger it's going to be. So keep that in mind. And this kind of ties into the previous episode when we were talking about camping is what you make of it, because if you could sacrifice a little bit of your comfort for getting your pack size because you want your ultralight small pack, there you go. If you want to bring everything in the kitchen sink and be the most comfortable, there you go. So we're going to now move on to sleeping bags. And the sleeping bags, they tie into the sleeping pad because all the sleeping bag ratings are actually based off of a sleeping pad. I've been told with an R value of 4 from manufacturers. I've also looked up more research and data, and it talks about it's a 4.8 R value when they're doing their testing to get their ISO and EN ratings. And one thing I forgot to talk about with the sleeping pads is the new, I think it came out in 2020, was the ASTM ratings. And so a lot of pads changed. I'm not going to dive too deep into that because there's a lot of debate on how accurate they are. And that's something we probably should scientifically dive into more later on. But just know that they have an ASTM standard for the R value of sleeping pads and how they test it. And then they also have an ISO or EN standard for sleeping bags. And so the R value for sleeping pads that they use during this testing for the sleeping bag is, around 4 to 5 on their R value. And the dummies that they put in these sleeping bags are wearing, all the base layers from head to toe. So beanie, neck gaiter, long sleeves, long pants, and socks. So keep this in mind while you're looking for sleeping bags. Now, sleeping bag ratings are kind of all over the place. The general rule that I give out is if it's a good name brand that uses good fill, Big Agnes, Nemo, Sea to Summit, Exped, any of the top tier brands that you see, the advertised rating is going to be the lower limit. And so I tell everybody add 10 degrees to what it's advertised. So if you see a bag like the Big Agnes Diamond Bark, it is a 30 degree, well, it actually comes in 0, 15, and 30 degree ratings. I tell people add 10 degrees to that to find your comfort rating with all of your layers and a good pad. So the 30 degree now becomes a 40 degree realistically. Now there are some variations to this because the bigger the bag, the more room there is that you have to fill up with your body heat to warm it up. And then you also have the susceptibility of cold spots. So this may, depending if you're a warm sleeper or a cold sleeper, fluctuate. So the different types of fill also matter. And so, sleeping bags are either typically synthetic or a down fill. And synthetic is like a polyester, and there's all different types of polyester out there where it's just, a woven fabric, or it's like a filament, and they make it into like a faux fluff. Some of them it's like a sheet. I know Snugpak, when they make theirs, it's almost like a sheet, like kind of like batting for a blanket. Down comes in all different types of fill power options. Fill power being that you'll see like 650, 750, and 850. And the higher the number is, the more loft you get. And you've probably seen it before where they have the down in like a beaker tube or something. And so like 1 ounce of down filled up so much is equal to a 650 fill. Or if it goes this high and it's even higher, it's a 850 fill. And so it's just more loft. And when you have more loft, you get more air pockets. And all these air pockets are what you heat up with your body heat to keep you warm. So you're essentially making this warm burrito around your body to keep all of your heat to you and around you to keep you warm. So back to the temperature ratings. Keep in mind, your temperature ratings. I feel that down is a superior product when you're trying to keep warm. It does a way better job at keeping you warm versus synthetic. Synthetic, there's a lot of different brands out there, and it does a good job as well. But generally, I tell people you may want to add 15 degrees to that bag. So instead of like the Echo Park is the synthetic version of the Diamond Park, and it comes in a 0, 20, and 40. Well, I tell people it's probably more realistically a 55 degree for the 40 degree. Again, this does vary depending on if you're a cold sleeper or a warm sleeper or what you've got going on. So just keep that in mind. Now with the ISO and EN ratings, that's just so you can kind of compare apples to apples. So if you see a Sea to Summit brand bag that is ISO and EN rated for this temperature, you can go to Nemo and see a ISO EN rated bag for the same temperature, and it should be 1 for 1. And I say it should be because there's always variance, right? And so the design and the shape of the bag always are going to be a possible variation of what your temperature acclimation or your temperature control may be. So keep that in mind when you're picking out your sleeping bag. Now, a couple other things like pros and cons for down versus synthetic. Down compresses more. It is an animal product, so people who are vegan or who prefer not to use that kind of product or may have, I've had some people say they have an allergic reaction to it. Again, that may not be an option for you, so keep that in mind. Synthetic, it doesn't compress as much. It is a plastic product, so, and now brands are really focusing on sustainability, and I know Nemo has done a really new rebranding thing they've done for 2024, where all of their bags are supposed to be very sustainable, and they're focusing on the recyclability of an old bag. So if it's a synthetic bag, that synthetic material has already been recycled once, and you are able to recycle it again. Haven't done a lot of research on the whole process on that, but that's what they're pushing out. That's what they're kicking out. And more brands are getting onto that as well. There's always that rumor. I'm going to say it's a rumor. It's not really a rumor. That down does not insulate when it is wet. And that is true. When you get down wet, it does clump up. It goes flat. There's no air pockets. There's no insulation properties at that point. Versus synthetic, if you get it wet, it doesn't clump up, it doesn't, compress, because it's just all this poly fiber, and so the water just kind of floats around. So that is true. But for motorcycle camping specifically, unless you're in like Southeast Asia in the middle of monsoon season and you cannot escape the rain for days on end, it's very hard to get a down sleeping bag wet to begin with. The outer materials, nylon or polyester, already have water resistant properties with the material itself. Then on top of that, it's DWR treated, so that way the water beads off of it. The real problem is getting water in through the seams, which is possible. Now, once you get water in, the down is also, a lot of the top name brands actually treat their down. So the down is also a hydrophobic down. And so it's more difficult to make it clump up and get wet and lose its properties. And so it's really hard to find a situation you would be in where your sleeping bag gets so soaking wet that you cannot use it at all. But if that were to happen, luckily, if you're on a motorcycle and you're within driving distance to some sort of lodging, you could go to either a campground or a hotel to get a cabin or a room and use a dryer to air dry your sleeping bag. I did a test with one of the Sea to Summit sleeping bags, and just kind of one step at a time. I put it into the stuff sack and threw it into a tote of water just to see how quick water would absorb into it. And it didn't. I mean, it got a little wet on the outside, but it wasn't detrimental to, keeping you warm. And progressively went till the point where I was having to drown the sleeping bag in this tote of water just to get it where it would take on water. Essentially, I was washing the sleeping bag at this point, kind of like you would in a bathtub. And it still took forever to get it soaking wet from head to toe, and there were still spots that were still dry. It was a warm day out, so I was able to actually throw it out on the driveway and just kind of toss it and turn it a couple of times, and within an hour or two, it was dry. So technology's come a very long way, and providing materials for making camping less fearful, I guess I could say, to the point where you don't have to worry about, if you want a down bag because it compresses and packs small and gives you really good thermal properties, go for it. Don't let water or rain be a deciding factor on if you should get a down bag or not. So that is the end of my down rant. But we'll continue on with the sleeping bags and talk about, after you decide what your temperature range that you want to pick out, that again, going with your pad, you figure out the range you're going to be sleeping in. If you're doing a lot of cross-country stuff, early spring, late fall, a 30-degree bag seems to be the most common that people are buying, down to maybe a 15-degree if you're a cold sleeper, or if you don't like wearing layers and you just want to shed some layers instead of sleeping in all those layers, you can get a colder bag to kind of, equal it out. So you pick a temperature range, pick your temperature rated bag, decide on a shape. Mummy bags are going to be the typical, contour to your body. They're the most efficient because they are shaped to your body, so there's not a lot of air pockets. It warms up quick. It keeps you warm. But a lot of people don't like these because they are restrictive, and you kind of have to learn to sleep with them. If you're a side sleeper, you're going to turn with the bag. You're not going to be able to turn inside of the bag. And then if the bag has zips on one side or the other, you may find if you're sleeping on your left side that the zipper is on the left side, which is very inconvenient. And the same thing for other bags, where if it's on the right side and you sleep on your right side, you're now sleeping on top of the zipper, and it's not very comfortable. Same thing going up to a relaxed mummy. You'll have the same issues if you're a side sleeper, but if it's a relaxed mummy, you may have a little bit more room to be able to turn sideways inside the bag, or at least spread your feet out a little bit more, and you have some more knee and elbow room to kind of, move around in the bag. But you're probably going to find yourself turning with the bag more than turning in the bag. Then you've got more of the traditional square-shaped thing, like your old Coleman-style sleeping bags that all just, four-corner zips. Probably really roomy. I haven't seen a lot of down bags in this shape, though. This is more of that family kind of Coleman, like I said, style sleeping bag. But it's going to have a lot of room, so you can move around and roll around in that. Now, a weird shaped bag is the Nemo Disco. It's this spoon shape, and, it's got this extra room in the knees and the elbows. And I've actually been able to turn inside of this bag and sleep sideways. And it's actually nice if you're sleeping on your back, because you can spread your legs and bend your knees and, put your arms in there and move around. So it's quite roomy for, what it is. And since it's got this spoon shape, it's got that little bit of contour around your waist and your belly. So it's supposed to be a little bit more efficient than just a wide open bag. Then the newer designs that have been coming out are like the Diamond Park sleeping bag, or the Park series of bags from Big Agnes, where it attaches to the pad and it's got zips on both sides. They get all the way down to the foot box, and you can completely unzip the top, so it's like a comforter. But then the back of the bag, because it attaches to the pad, is just a sheet. It's like a fitted sheet. And this has been the most popular style, although it packs larger because it's got all this extra material. Even though it packs larger, people love it because you can sleep in this like you do at home. And I tell everybody, if you want a bed away from home, especially new campers who've never been camping before and they're trying to get into it, they really like this bag because they can just crawl in it, sleep like they do at home. They can toss and turn, they roll around, everything. You can barrel roll inside of this bag and not get tangled up. And it's fantastic. I love it. We use the two-person version ourselves. We're going camping. It's the King Solomon. Fantastic bag. The Echo Park is the synthetic version of that bag, and it's beyond popular. And it was a complete accident. Like when we started the store, it started carrying the bag. It wasn't by, I wasn't trying to sell that one as the most popular. People just started buying it, and they really loved it. And after we really got into it, we really liked it as well. So, a nice accident. Now, another competitor out there is Zen Bivy. A lot of people have been talking about that one. It's got some differences to the Diamond Park or the Big Agnes versions. The shape is a little bit different. It doesn't attach all the way to the foot box, from what I can tell. It just attaches at the top half of the pad, and then the bottom half moves around. But the foot box looks like it has a little bit more of a taper to it. But yeah, definitely check them out if that's something that you're thinking about getting into because you want the ability to kind of sleep like you do at home. Moving on from bags, kind of going a little bit different, would be a quilt. And this is kind of similar to the Big Agnes, except it's not going to have all the extra straps and the way it attaches to the pad. It still attaches to the pad with like a little elastic band, but that's it, instead of being like a fitted sock that kind of goes over the pad. This one has a strap that attaches to the pad in maybe one or two places. And with quilts, you can get them in different versions, but they're not going to have a hood, and the back is going to be open. So you stick your feet into like the foot box area, which could be sewn together, or it could be a zipper that you could unfold into a blanket later on. But you'll stick your feet in, and then you just throw it over you like a quilt or like a blanket at home, like your comforter. These do also have the option, so that way, when it's attached to the pad, you can actually turn and sleep sideways inside of it. They're really popular with backpackers and hammock campers because you don't have this bag you're wrestling inside of your hammock. You can just kind of crawl in, put your feet in, and then throw it on top of you. Again, the foot box options may be limited. You may have a little bit of a tighter foot box, but if that's not a problem for you, this may be a way to go because of the different ways you can use a quilt. Also, they pack smaller because there's less material to them. Like I said, they don't have a hood, so you'll have to keep that in mind with your temperature ratings. Keeping in mind that because you don't have a hood, you're going to lose some heat that way. And also, because it's not wrapped completely around you, even though it is attached to the pad, you're going to lose heat out the sides. And you don't have these draft tubes like the sleeping bags do. And that's going to cause, again, heat loss. So just keep that in mind. So just a quick recap for picking out your sleeping bag. Determine what range of temperatures you're going to be camping in and sleeping in. Make sure you have a compatible sleeping pad. Decide on which type of fill you would like, if you want synthetic or down fill. And then determine the shape of the bag that you would prefer. And again, this is one of those I feel that you should push to the bottom of the list would be the weight and the pack size. It should obviously be a determining factor because after you pick out all the other, or I should say, as you filter out bags based off of your preferences, it'll come down to the weight and the pack size. And you may say, well, I like something like the Diamond Park because it's wide and big and I can turn in it, but it is a lot bigger packing and it weighs more than, say, something like the Nemo, Disco, or even a quilt. The quilt packs about half the size as the Diamond Park does. The quilts come in, the various fill options as well, so they can press down a little bit more, and there's less material to it. So if you're going for ultimate comfort, you may sway towards the Big Agnes Diamond Park. If you're going for more ultralight, we carry the Enlightened Equipment brand. So an Enlightened Equipment quilt, there's tons of other brands out there. They're all, you do research, you can find all the different types and what the materials they use. They're more focused on backpackers, so they're going to be leaning more towards the ultralight range. And then if you want a traditional mummy bag that keeps you wrapped all the way up, and then, that could be an option as well because they do pack really small. I know Season Summit has some of the better mummy-style bags, even the relaxed mummy bags that pack really small and are, really, really good, well-engineered, good rated bags. So I think that covers everything for pads, bags. The only other thing I can talk about is the pillows. And with your pillows, there's a lot of variations on fill. So you've got like the foam fill, Again, it's probably like a polyester fill, air. Some of them are air and foam, and some are down. You can get down pillows now that are nice and fluffy. Again, this is all based off of what you want, what's comfortable. My favorite is the Nemo Pillow Camp Pillow because it actually uses a layer of memory foam on top of a TPU air bladder. And so it doesn't pack as small as just a traditional air pillow with a TPU air bladder, but it's more comfortable because it has that memory foam layer on the top. And actually, I sleep with my arm underneath the pillow on my side, and I can air down the pillow almost to its flat and put that over my arm and then lay on it. And so I'm not feeling my arm through the pillow with that memory foam on top. And it's just enough cushion to keep my head level. Whereas with a regular air pillow, it kind of folds around my arm and then my head's kind of rolling back and forth. If you like a firmer pillow, definitely go for an air pillow. Find one that's got some of the synthetic insulation on top, or maybe even some of the down insulation on top. That'll give you a little bit more lift as well, if you need some lift. If those are too hard for you, maybe you would prefer like a down or foam filled pillow where there's no air involved, because air, like I said, it's a little bit firmer on your head. And the foam ones are typically a little bit softer, and so let your head sink into the pillow more. And they are going to pack larger though, because you can only compress foam so much. And if you want a bigger pillow, the bigger the pillow, the more foam, you know. I've had people tell me, and I've seen people talk about cutting a pillow in half and then sewing it together that they picked up from the store because they liked that pillow and they wanted to take it with them camping. Again, this is that balance that we're going through and sacrificing weight and size for comfort. So more comfort, it's going to be more weight and more pack size. Less comfort, well, you can get your pack size a little bit smaller. So, and there's really not much more to talk about pillows that I can think of. And I may be wrong, and maybe somebody will chime in the comments and, send me a question or comments about, other features to look into pillows. But pillows are pretty simple, and there's I wouldn't say there's a ton of options out there. Well, there are a ton of options out there, and there's a ton of different materials out there. But those are just like kind of the basic things to look for in a pillow, and kind of helping you filter and narrow down what you would feel would be best for you. And now, especially when you buy a new pillow, my favorite thing to do is actually getting a pillow in that I'm going to try for camping, but sleeping on my bed at home and just using the camp pillow instead of regular pillow. And what this does is actually it eliminates the sleeping pad and the sleeping bag as being a potential reason why you can't sleep well while you're camping, right? If you're in your bed at home and you already sleep well with your bed and your comforter and your pillow, and you now take away your pillow and put a new pillow in place, you can, eliminate which pillows work and which pillows don't for you before you get to go on your camping trip. So that way you're definitely going to have a good pillow for camping. And you can do the exact same thing with your sleep system with the pad and the bag. When you go home, it's a little bit harder with your sleeping bag inside the house because, temperature control, right? But you can lay in the backyard if you really wanted to. But you could also go home and take a nap. When you go home and take a nap, lay on the pad, on the floor, in your house, and just see if you're comfortable sleeping on that pad. It's a good way to test it and figure out, before you get outdoors, and then add in, your pillow and throw that on there too. And you can use your pad with a normal pillow and then use your pad with a camp pillow, and you go back and forth. And it's like troubleshooting anything else, right? You don't want to swap a bunch of parts at one time and then all of a sudden fix the problem, but you don't know what you fixed because you swapped all the parts at once. So swapping out one item at a time and, figuring out what works best for you. So this episode did run a little bit long so far. I think we're sitting at about 45 minutes. But for the sake of editing and cutting it down, I'm probably going to leave it as a long episode. And I'm sorry for those who are commuting back and forth to work, where you have to listen to this and have to break it up into separate sections. So the first section was about 20 minutes, which covers, the sleeping pads, and the second section covers sleeping bags and pillows. So maybe you can just do this in 2 parts in your travels while you're commuting. So anyway, again, I appreciate everybody for listening. Hopefully you found this information useful. I know this is a lot of the same stuff I've said in other videos and in other content we've put out. But if you're new to camping and new to motorcycle camping and new to Moto Camp Nerd, hopefully you learned how to build a good sleep system that works for you, and that's the best sleep system for you. And that way you can change, and if you've been camping, you can change up your sleep system to have a better night's sleep while camping, because that is the ultimate goal. So, again, thank you all for listening, and go find your camp.